Right, so today we're doing a 1JZ-GTE VVT-i. That's a JZS171 from a Toyota Crown. It's going into an IS200 and it's using a R154 Manual Gearbox. So let's get into it. Right, so as discussed, this is a 1JZ-GTE VVT-i from a JZS171 Crown. It's going into an IS200. Customers using R154 Manual Gearbox. So that's the complete setup of the engine over there. What we're going to do first of all is a completely brand new harness that we've built, and it's part of our modular system. So we're just going to cut now and we're going to go to the process of the whole build, and you can see exactly what it looks like underneath. So we'll do that now. Right, so now you've seen all of that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go through the entire layout, do a little bit of explanation on the modular design. At the end of the video, we'll have the pictures of all the different harnesses and everything on the bench so you can see in more detail as to what they look like, but I'll go through them as we do through the layout over here. So, starting inside the ECU box, we've obviously got your 5 white ECU plugs and your 1 grey one at the end there. We've got the patch resin that interfaces with the standard IS200 22 and 28 pin plug that remain behind after you remove the 1GFE. Going over here, we've then got the blue plug, the grey plug and the black plug. So these are your body plug connected interfaces with the IS200. And that's pretty much it in terms of connecting the actual engine harness inside the vehicle itself. Now, normally we wouldn't have this device on, but the customer is actually wanting to use an Altezza gauge cluster, so we're incorporating a tacho corrector, so we can correct it from 6-cylinder down to a 4-cylinder signal, which will work on the Altezza cluster. So that is actually in there as well, and as you can see, this does actually fit quite nicely in this little cavity down there, so that can be pushed down there. We then got the automatic transmission emulator, so that's going to get rid of all the codes for the automatic gearbox. Again, that can just be tucked down there nice and neatly out of the way. And then lastly, we've got our MPX converter device, so it converts the MPX data from the Crown ECU to work with an IS200, 300 or Altezza. So that should be absolutely all fine. And again, this can all be tucked away very nice and neat underneath the cover over there. So moving on from there, we then end up with a grommet that slides down in there, so that's all fine. Then what we have is coming out the grommet, we've got the 3 resistors. So these are the 3 resistors that get rid of the 3 codes in the ECU for SLU, SLN, and SLT. So they do get very hot, that's why we don't put them inside the ECU box. So they can be mounted down along the side of the chassis, or side of the body here, out of the way basically. Then we have the igniter. So obviously the 1JZ is a waste spark system and it uses an igniter to fire dumb coils. So that's incorporated there as well. Then the harness is going to run down here and obviously along to the back of the engine over there. And then we have one breakout here, which is going to come to our injector sub harness. So this is part of the modular system here. This means that all of the injectors can be unplugged directly from here. And so if you wanted to swap to an aftermarket ECU and you wanted to change injectors, really simple and straightforward. You just unplug that and you could put any injectors you wanted basically, and we can make a sub harness, so just disconnect that and connect new ones in. Then it comes along a little bit further and then it breaks out here where it goes to the cam sensor. So you can see the breakout over there and it just goes to the cam sensor over there. So again, this is a 2JZ-GE engine, so we're putting it on, it does work on this particular engine, but this is obviously not what you'd see on a 1JZ-GTE. Once it breaks out there, it's going to come further along here till it has another breakout over here, and this is where there's going to be a considerable amount of sections coming out down the bottom. So what I'm going to do is, in this case, the throttle harness comes up to here, simply because we're using this throttle, so it has to come up here. But this would obviously normally be pushing down through the holes in the intake, where the original 1JZ-GTE harness went down through. Then we've got all the plugs coming off here, so we've got your TPS, we've got your drive-by-wire motor, and we've got your pedal position sensor. Now remember, in the 1JZ, it's going to obviously be here at the front. So what we've done is we've made the pedal position horns quite long, so they can come back up through the throttle and plug in to this one over here. And these two are a little bit shorter, so they'll plug into the throttle, which plugs in about here. Right, so once we've gone down there, then we're going to go to the other sections that are going to pop down through here. So I'm going to try and get it as best as I possibly can. Remember, there will be actual photos at the end so you can see exactly what these look like. But effectively, we've got the sub harness for the NOx sensors. So again, what we've done to make it modular is we've actually taken two twin core shielded cables down here. So effectively, it's all wired up, ready to go for wideband NOx sensors, Bosch wideband NOx sensors, if you change to an aftermarket ECU. So what I'll do is, if you check our video over here where we've done a plug and play for an IS200, that same system works exactly for this setup over here. So you can effectively buy that little black box from us. It plugs into all these 5 plugs over here. Anything extra that we've added into the harness is already wired to these plugs, and it will carry through on that device, and you can then attach an ECU master, a link, a Haltech, pretty much whatever you want. And if you let us know, we can build that harness for you. Just make a little patch harness there, so you don't have to worry about changing anything. You just plug this in and away you go. So I put a link up there earlier so you can see exactly how that system works. Right, so we've got our NOx sensors over here. So again, these can be interchanged for Bosch widebands, and you see one goes down to over there, and then the other one is over there. So it's just a little split over here, and it goes to those two particular sensors over there. So I'm just going to move these out the way. Okay, then the next one we've got our oil sub harness. So again, at the moment, this is just going to the single oil pressure switch. It is a 6-pin plug, so you'll see we've put allocation in here for an oil pressure switch, an oil pressure sensor, and an oil temperature sensor, or an oil temperature and pressure combined, like one of those Bosch sensors over there. So again, if you want to change an aftermarket ECU, you can just literally phone us up and we can make it all sub harness and supply you with a Bosch combined pressure and temp sensor, and that can work with either ECU master, link, Haltech, whichever one you particularly want. All right. Also coming down here, we've then got our harnesses for the PRG, which is just over here. So these are little vacuum solenoids that'll live around here. And then we've got the fuel pressure up solenoid. So again, that's that over there. Now these do have 2 different keyways on the keys, so you can't actually plug them into the wrong one, so don't stress too much about that. All right. Then also coming down here, we've got our power steering pressure switch. Now what you'll notice is the power steering pressure switch normally lives on the power steering high pressure lines that are here. If you don't have that system when you're doing your swap, if you want to do a cheeky little fix, you can just plug in your IS200 map sensor and just bolt it up under the way out here. That'll get rid of the code for the power steering pressure switch. All right. If you do have it, you can plug it in and all that system will work as intended. And then also coming down here, in this part of the same harness, we have the aircon. Okay, so that obviously comes down here and it'll plug into your aircon pump right over there, just like that. Okay. Now remember, the 1JZ-GTEs don't have a low oil level sensor, so again, this is a different engine. You would have a blanking plate down here where we have the oil level sensor on there. Right, then the next section that comes out is going to be basically the starter and the gearbox harness. So you see I've got the starter solenoid one right there, so that's coming straight through to there. All right, and then we've got the gearbox harness which comes through, so that's designed to go along the bottom there, and you'll see it runs up along here. And then we've got our reverse switch connector over there. So this is already wired up for the R154. And then we've got the speed sensor over there. All right, so these are all the section harnesses that come underneath here. So again, they're designed, they break off over here and they go straight down through there. All right. Following on from that breakout, you're going to then come along over here, and we're going to have a breakout here, which is going to go to all your 3 coils. So you got 1, 2, 3. Now, the order of the labels are going to confuse you, but it's basically the way in which they fire. So what we've got is obviously ignition 2 is at the front here, because actually coil cylinder 1 has the spark plug on there. So cylinder 1 fires from cylinder 6. So what you'll actually see here is we've got ignition 1 at the back there, because it's 1 and 6. And then we've got ignition 2, which is 5 and 2. And then underneath the throttle body here, we've got ignition 3, which is 3 and 4. Okay, so that's the firing order that they go in. So that it relates to the firing order, but it does also relate kind of to what the cylinder it's in or the cylinder it fires. So in this case, ignition 2, that's cylinder 2. Ignition 1 is on cylinder 6, but effectively that long lead comes across and that actually fires cylinder 1, and then vice versa. The number 3 in the middle there will either be on 3 or 4, but the lead will go over to 3. Okay, so don't get confused by that layout, but the cables are only long enough to reach to their perspective thing, so you can't really get it wrong in terms of hooking it up there. The other thing that's going to break out over here is your oil control valve. So that's for the VVT-i. So again, that just literally tucks around the back here and goes straight into the oil control valve there. So we follow on down from there. Our next breakout point is then going to be for our lambda sensor and our air bypass valve. So at the moment, I'm just using a manifold for an IS200. And so this would obviously normally run across along here above the shielding over there. And then it would plug into the lambda sensor, which would be at the back there. And then your air bypass valve, which would also be at the back there. So that's that section over there that plugs in there. Then what we do is we come down a little bit further and we have another breakout point here. And that's where your mass airflow sensor comes from. So at the moment I've got this facing the wrong way because if the fans blow up into there, it causes the MAF to read all weirdly. Also coming out of here, you've got your coolant temp sensor. So again, this is on a modular style plug. The reason being is that we actually need, if you guys change to an aftermarket ECU in an IS200 300 or Altezza, or in this case IS200 or Altezza with this particular setup, what's going to happen is we need an analog temperature signal for our analog MPX converter device. So you'll see what we've done here is we put a 3-pin DTM plug and we've actually carried an extra wire to the ECU, left it like it's populated but it's not going anywhere. So in the event you wanted to change to an aftermarket ECU, we can actually then attach another sub harness that not only has the coolant temp sensor plug, so you see there's the coolant temp sensor plug. Obviously in the 1JZ, the coolant temp sensors are at the front here. So this is designed to come down and there's your temperature plug straight into there. If you change to an aftermarket ECU, what we can then do is swap out the normally covered up bolt hole with a JZS100 style coolant temp sensor, which funnily enough, I've actually got in here already. So you guys will know from the 2JZ-GTE VVT-is, you've got your coolant temp sensor there. You've also got a brass bolt over there, and that's a JZS100 temp sensor. So I actually use that when we create harnesses for aftermarket ECU to supply temp sensor for the analog MPX converter. All right, so that is your then coolant temp sensor. Obviously this wouldn't be stretched over there like that. It would just come down and then come back and plug into the coolant temp sensor there. Then the last two things to break out here, we've got our crank sensor, which just comes out there. And then we've got our alternator plug over there. All right, so the only thing you have to do on your side is you're just gonna connect your main alternator cable from the bolt over here, straight to your fuse box, which yours is a right-hand drive vehicle, so your fuse box is right there, and that's where the alternator goes onto. So it'll go down along the subframe, up, and then to the alternator over there. All right, so that's pretty much the entire layout of the harness. Hopefully that all makes sense. And oh, I forgot to mention the throttle is also on its own harness, and basically the reason we've done this is effectively we know you guys like to change over to things like Bosch throttles if you know, changing your intake and so on and so forth. So this then allows you to put whatever throttle body you want on. And what we've also done actually as well is we've also taken the intake air temperature sensor circuit to this plug as well. In this case, it's obviously not connected up, but in the event that you did want to go aftermarket ECU and you wanted to then change to a, say, a Bosch throttle, and now you need an intake air temperature sensor, it's all part of this plug, which means it can be brought down and you can fit your intake air temperature sensor in your pipe that comes up and then into your throttle over there. So hopefully you've pretty much thought of everything, that if you guys don't want to go aftermarket, it's really, really straightforward. You don't have to buy an entire new harness. You can just change these sub harnesses out. You can fit, you know, Bosch wideband knock sensors. You could put a Bosch throttle body if you wanted to. You could put your separate air intake sensor when you go aftermarket via that plug over there. You can change out your injectors for whatever you want. And that's about it really. So we are exploring the option of possibly looking at guys that want to maybe change over to Yaris coils from the very beginning, because these dumb coils require an igniter. But if guys are willing to change over to Yaris coils because they have all the correct signals for the standard ECU, so you can fit Yaris coils and they do work. So again, that's another thing we are busy working on at the moment, is the possibility of actually running changing over to, you know, coil over plug setup. So whether it be Audi R8s, whether it be Yaris's, whether it be R35s, and then what we'd probably do is have another section coming out here with a separate connector that you could then run pretty much whatever coils you wanted. At this stage, I don't think there's a possibility of doing it if you want to run, you know, the standard coils to start off with and then swap over later, because all of the connections are different there. But we'll work on it. We'll see what it is. If you guys comment down below and say something that you want, please feel free, and then obviously I can spend some time actually working and seeing if it's a possibility to make it happen. It very well might be, so we'll work on that. But that's the whole layout there, so hopefully that's really nice and easy for you to get the harness on, get everything plugged in, and then get everything up and running there. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to quickly go. I'm going to make sure it's up to temperature, because part of the startup testing is to make sure that we have some cooler temp to work with on the gauge there. But I'm going to quickly do that and pop back in a second. We'll see you guys now. Bye-bye. Right, so now we're going to move on to the actual testing of the harness, and this is going to include obviously starting it up and running. So as you know, like I said, this is a 2JZ, but everything is the same in terms of the crank and the cam triggers and everything, so it does work on you, no problem at all, as you'll see. Right, so coming to the bits we're going to test with just turning the key on. So first thing we're going to look at is immobilizer removal. So the customer had the immobilizer removed already. We obviously wire up the security light to obviously check that it works. Plus also, if you leave your car locked and you walk away, people think you have an immobilizer on there, so that's all good. Then what we'll do is we'll come over to the interior here, the missing interior, but we'll go look at the ambient temperature and make sure that that is working as it should. And with this ECU, it is actually detecting the temperature, so that temperature you see there is correct, and it will actually fluctuate depending on the temperature outside. Then what we'll do is we're going to come over here and we're going to go look at the charge light, the oil light, and the check engine light. So that's what we're looking for in the dash here. We've got the oil light, the charge light, and we've got the check engine light in the corner. We want to make sure those all power up when we put the ignition on. Once we've done that, we're going to pop over to the other side to the gearbox harness there. We're going to bridge the reverse switch to make sure that the reverse light works. And we'll hear the buzzing on the dash, so we know the whole circuit going to the interior of the vehicle is fine. Then what we'll do is we'll feed a signal to the speed sensor plug. That'll make sure that the speed's working. As soon as he plugs it in, it should feed the speed signal directly to the cluster itself. All right. And then just remember, guys, as well, on an IS200, the manuals have the speed coming from a speed sensor via the actual ECU box coming to the cluster. The automatic versions have the speed coming from the ABS ECU, which is this bad boy over here with the 4 white plugs in over there. Okay. So if you're a manual and you're swapping out an end, or if you're an auto and you're swapping to a different gearbox like a BMW or something that doesn't have a speed sensor, you don't need to worry. It's already coming from the ABS ECU. The neat trick is that if you want to and you are swapping a manual IS200 to say a BMW gearbox, you don't need to worry. You just take one wire from that ABS ECU and you feed it into the back of the cluster and you get your speed back. So all good. So don't worry about not having a speed signal on the gearbox. It's not the end of the world. All right. Okay, so then what we do is we go back to the OBD2 machine. So we've got this fired up. We're going to make sure it communicates, it detects the ECU and so on. And this is plugged directly into the standard location inside the vehicle. So there's no extra plug or anything. The existing plug that's in there, you're just going to plug your OBD2 machine in and it will read, as evident when we do it here with this one. Once you've got that open, then we're going to test the fuel pump and the AC system. So the fuel pump, we're just going to activate it from here, because in this case the fuel pump is being controlled via the ECU. I'm going to pop a link up in the top corner there just to go through how the fuel systems work. There's obviously the differences between different models. So if you want to have some in-depth view of how they work, pop into that link over there and it'll go through everything there for you. Then in terms of the AC clutch, what we're going to test is actually 2 things. Number 1, we're going to put the magnetic clutch relay output on the ECU via the OBD. Then we're going to hear the relay click over there. What I'm also going to do is we're then going to press the AC button inside the car, and using this I can see that the AC signal has actually been received via the ECU, so we know that that system works. Other than that, the AC system is going to work exactly the same as it would in the standard car. So everything needs to be plumbed in, and your pressure switch, which is at the front, needs to be functioning 100%. Okay, so as long as everything is functioning as gassed up, it will work. All right. Okay, so once that's done, we've done all the bits and bobs we're just going to do with the key on. Then we're going to move over to actually starting the engine up. So in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to test the starter circuit. That's pretty self-explanatory. We want to make sure that when you stick the key in and turn it, the engine's going to start. That's good. Then what we'll do is we'll come back over to the cluster here. We're going to check that the tacho's working. So in this case, I have calibrated the tacho converter for a 6-cylinder signal back again, so it will give us accurate reading there. Obviously, I've got a video on how to adjust the tacho. I'll put a link up in the top corner there for you. And so that will then allow you to adjust it on your side, Raveen, to work with your Altezza cluster. You can adjust it back down again. All right. Or up actually, sorry, from a 6 to a 4-cylinder. Right, so that's that done. Then we're also going to make sure all the dash lights go off. So we've got the oil light, we've got the charge light, we've got the check engine light. We want to make sure those all go off when it's running. So that all works as it should do. Then we'll look at the coolant temp as well, just to make sure that works. So I have run it up now, so it should be about 70 odd degrees. So we should get a nice reading on the coolant temp gauge there. Then what we'll do is we'll move over to the throttle. So remember, these are drive-by-wire. Even though they have a cable, they are drive-by-wire. So what we'll do is we'll rev it up to make sure we're getting a rev from the second we move the actual throttle pedal position sensor itself. All right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the OBD2 machine. We're going to test the oil control valve. Now, sometimes it cuts the engine out, but basically it like advances and retards the cams. So it sounds like a really lumpy engine, and so normally what happens is you'll actually see the engine cut out. If it cuts out, that's good, it means it's working. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over there. All of our injectors are actually just sitting on the injectors. I haven't got them clipped down just so I got easy access. So if you do hear the occasional misfire, that's the reason why. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll make sure we've got 0 codes, which we should have 0 codes on our diagnostic machine here. Okay, just to make sure that you can see the check engine light goes off, and you should have 0 codes on your side when it fits. Don't get caught out by this power steering pressure switch. Like I said, if you don't have that switch anymore because you didn't get on the power steering lines, just grab your map sensor from your IS200 or any Toyota map sensor. It doesn't really matter. All the pressure sensors have the same plug on them. Just plug it in and tuck it away underneath there. It'll get rid of the code because it at least reads something for there. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to go over to our car. This is obviously your key in your car over there. What we're going to do now is we're going to see over here, we've got the check engine light flashing. And as I insert the key, there you go. So now you can see the security light has gone off. So I haven't turned the ignition to on, I haven't done anything at all. It's actually reading the key just from putting the key in the ignition barrel. There is actually a wire going from the ignition barrel to the ECU, which turns it on. And so what I'll do is, just so you can hear, okay, the EFI relay actually turns on when I insert the key. So 1, 2, 3. Right, so you can actually hear. The ECU is turning on the EFI relay, which is supplying power to the actual ignition barrel to read. And one other way to just test that as well is what you'll see is, for instance, this device is powered with the plus B circuit, which is the same one that powers the key, and you can see that's already flashing and I haven't even turned the ignition on. Okay, so that's how the system works. That's in a normal car, that's how it works. You don't even need to turn the ignition on to know if your key is working and the immobilizer is deactivated. Right, okay, so let's moving on. So now we're going to put the ignition on. All right. We're going to pop over to our ambient temp sensor, and you can see there 17 degrees C. All right, so that's working exactly as it should. And then we're going to move over and we're looking at, so we've got our oil light, we've got our battery light, and we've got our check engine light over there as well. Okay, and also just to let you know, you also have your snow function as well. So that is working by MPX. If you guys want, you can actually wire up an IS300 switch, so you can actually have power mode. I'll show you in a minute when we go to the OBD2 machine. It's only one wire you've got to change, which is just this extra one you see I've added there. And then effectively you can actually put it in power mode as well. All right. All right, so now we've checked those over there. Let's move over to the reverse switch. So I'm just going to go over. So this is your reverse plug over here. So all I'm going to do is what your gearbox does basically, and that is bridge it. As I do that, I'm not going to paste this over, but you can actually hear, the buzzing over there. Right, so that means the reverse circuit is working absolutely fine. So that means we are going to have absolutely no problems at all there. Your reverse lights will activate when you stick it in reverse. Now I am going to have to move this around, so just bear with me. Right, so for the speedo, how are we going to test it? Basically, this is a Hall effect style sensor. So you've got a 12 volts, you've got a ground, and you've got a signal. So what I'm actually doing is we're using one of these signal converter devices because we have a test function on them, so you guys can find like a tacho on your cluster if you don't know where it is. So what I'm doing is I'm powering and grounding the device from the plug, so you can see the LED is flashing. So now I know the 12 volts and the ground actually at the plug are all okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm literally just going to put it into the test mode. So just bear with me a second while I do that. Okay. Right, so now we're in test mode. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the yellow wire onto the signal. Make sure I'm on there. And as you can see, it's now reading a speed through the cluster. So super happy with that. That means from the terminals all the way to the cluster, all the wiring is 100%, and we are happy with that. Right, let's pop onto our OBD2 machine here. So I'm just going to pop this over to data list. This machine takes forever to load, so I pre-do it before we do the video. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to function, system select, and you'll see it's picked up as a Crown JZS. Okay, so we know that it's picking up the correct ECU for what's inside the vehicle. Now, if we go to data list, you're going to see here that we are picking up, see, so 68 degrees coolant temp, 29 air temp, 16% for throttle position sensor. All right. And so that should be all fine. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to test the fuel pump out. So if we go to active test, now it says fuel pump relay and fuel pump. If you watched the video from earlier, you'll know exactly what that actually means and why I'm using fuel pump and not the fuel pump relay to carry out the correct test. Okay, just a bit confusing the way they do it. Right, so as I press on, I'm going to move over here. You can actually hear the fuel pump relay kick in. Right, so that means the ECU is controlling the fuel pump relay and everything is fine. Just remember the fuel pump relay on an IS200 is actually called the circuit opening relay. Again, it's to do with the way that they run the fuel pump systems. Like on the IS300, you actually have the fuel pump resistor, whereas this one you don't. But of course, they couldn't call it the fuel pump relay, because if they have to call the fuel pump relay, which is the one that bypasses the circuit through the resistor to slow the pump down. So they called it circuit opening relay. All right, confusing, I know, but that's just the way it is. All right, so that's the fuel pump done. What we're going to do now is we're going to move over to AC clutch. So remember, your AC magnetic clutch relay is in this one over here along with your fan relay. And I think this is where people get confused. On the IS300, you actually have the fuel pump relay here. I see it all the time. That's the one that bypasses the fuel pump supply via the resistor. So if you see that little resistor on an IS300 that lives there, that's what that is, okay? All right, so that's the clutch that's the relay for the magnetic clutch relay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna quickly go into here, magnetic clutch relay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on, and you can actually hear the AC pump because it's plugged in working. So I'll just do that again. You might be able to actually see. Let me see if you can see. Yeah. Maybe you see it, maybe you didn't. Sorry about that. I just thought I'd show you for that one. Right, so that's the AC clutch actually working in terms of turning it on. What we want to do now is we want to actually see if the signal coming from the car is being received by the ECU. So what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down here, and you'll see we've got AC signal, which is just above park neutral park switch. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go inside the car, press the button, and there you go. See, on and off. Okay. All right, so what I'll do as well while I'm here, I'll just show you on here. Let's go into, there you go over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my power and snow button, which you don't usually have on an IS200, but you'll see there where it says ECT power mode. If I press the switch, that goes to on and off, and if I press snow, that goes to on and that goes to off. So all of that works exactly as you would expect it to. And again, if you have the IS300 dash actually has a PWR light on it that would light up. Okay, in this case it'll just be the snow button that lights up, but that all works exactly as you expect it to there. Right, so that's all of the bits and bobs we're going to test there without the engine actually running. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move into the engine actually running. All right. The JZ is a very loud engine even compared to the V8. So again, I'm just going to keep talking as we go through. Hopefully you guys hear everything, but quick recap of what we're going to do. We're going to start with test the starting circuit. We'll move over to the dash, look at the tacho signal to make sure that's working. We'll look over to see all the dash lights turn off after we started it. We'll look at the coolant temp, which we can kind of see already is already showing coolant. We'll do the drive-by-wire test by revving it. I'll test the oil control valves via the OBD2 machine. Then I'm going to go and unplug each injector one at a time so you can hear that it's misfiring and all cylinders are firing. you can actually see on the exhaust we've got plenty of heat coming through there, because this is actually a brand new exhaust we fitted, so this is from this particular harness. And then what we'll do is we'll go through the codes. We'll show that you don't have any, and I'll also show you how to read them on an IS200 if you don't have an OBD2 machine, because it is a JDM particular ECU, so you can do the flash code system. I'll go through that with you. Right, so let's get into it. So first of all, you're going to jump in your car and you're going to turn your key to start it. Okay, so we went through all of those. Again, they're just sitting on the injector, so I do apologize, I have to keep tapping them down. But yeah, so all 6 cylinders are firing exactly as they should, so we are super happy with that. What I'm going to do now is obviously going to turn the car back on again. This would obviously lost communication, so we'll go back into there, so you're going to retrieve all the data. Then we're going to go to diagnostic codes. And you can see we've got 0 codes. So everything has been accounted for in terms of the ATMU taking care of all of the gearbox codes, and the 3 resistors taking care of SLU, SLN, and SLT. So again, you should have 0 codes. If you are trying to diagnose anything and you do come up with a code, it will be relevant. But like I said, please don't get caught up by the power steering pressure, because if you don't connect that, you will get a check engine light, but it will tell you straight away there that you do have a power steering pressure issue. All right. So how to read codes if you haven't got a diagnostics machine. So on the IS200, depending on what year it is, so pre-2001, this specifically refers to European models. Australian ones for Raveen might be a little bit different, but basically there's 2 ways if it's an early model, 1 way if it's a newer model. So if it's an earlier model, you should have this diagnostic plug on the front of this little fuse box over here with the relays in. If you do, you'll see inside there you've got E1 and you've got TC, right? So all you're going to do is effectively you're going to take a wire, paper clip, whatever you want. You can bridge E1 and you can bridge TC, and then that'll cause the system to go into diagnostic mode. That will then allow you to flash codes via the check engine light. It'll also lock the timing at 10 degrees on the end. So if you want to check timing with a timing light, that's an easy way to do it. You just literally bridge those there, keep the engine running, put a clamp over cylinder 1, which has got an actual lead onto it, which is quite nice. And then you've got your readings down there. So you've got 0, 5, 10, and 15 degrees over there. And then you should be able to see in this, not in this case, but you can see the little, where I've made a white mark on the crank there. Remember, there are 2 marks on that, so be careful with the JZ. There are 2 marks on the crank. Make sure you got the right one. All right. So basically all that happens if you bridge those 2 terminals. So I'm just going to go with my piece of wire here. We're going to go into E1 and we're going to go into TC. You can hear the throttle makes a weird noise. Now in this case, because we've got 0 codes, obviously it's just going to flash continuously. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the ignition off. I'm going to now make a code. So if I just take out the mass airflow sensor here, Okay, bear with me. These new terminals make it quite tough. Right, so I've disconnected the mass airflow sensor. So there's the plug. I'm going to quickly try to start it up, so bear with me. You see she dies straight away. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bridge that terminal, and I'm going to count the codes with you. So let's do that. Now we've got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 24 intake air. And we got 1, 2, 3. And then we got 1. It's 31. That's the mass airflow. And you'll see long pause. And then it'll go 1, 2. And then 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right. So nice and easy. 2, 4, 24 intake air temperature signal. 3, 1, 31 mass airflow signal. So again, I've made the code up by disconnecting it, but it gives you a good idea exactly how to read the codes and exactly how that works. Now, I've done it over there, but you can do it on an OBD2 plug, all right? And this applies pretty much for most Toyotas of this era. Unfortunately, there are certain particular cases like the US that didn't allow you to do this. You had to actually read it via an OBD2 machine. But Europe and Japan, you could basically bridge pin 4 and 13. That's TC and a ground, and you have the exact same process. So exactly like I've done there with a piece of wire or paper clip, you can do exactly the same thing, and you basically just bridge those over there, and you can read those codes. And you can check the timing because it locks the timing at 10 degrees, which is why you don't want to leave that connected, because if you run at 10 degrees timing the whole time, you're going to lose a lot of power and it's not going to be fun. All right, so just remember, if you are trying to read codes, do pull the wire or the paper clip out after you finish. Don't leave it in there. Nobody's going to have fun when you do that. All right, so Raveen, obviously now we're completely finished now, so we can get this all boxed up and sent off to you, and you can obviously get your car running and get everything in as you wanted to. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below. If you want a much faster response, you can head to our Facebook page. We now have a dedicated person dealing with messages, so you should hopefully get a response pretty quickly. And then if you hang around, obviously we're going to have photos of the complete harness sitting on the bench, so you can see exactly what all of these sub harnesses look like, because it is a bit tough to see when it's actually on the engine itself. So if you want, hang around for those and you can see that. But thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.